Hey guys, in this episode we're going to be talking about how to translate your Rails app into multiple languages using the Rails Internationalization or I18n support. Now all this stuff is built in for translating your app. All the strings and your controllers, your views, your helpers, your mailers, and so on are available to be translated into multiple languages as long as you use the T helper. So I18n.t and the name of a key is what you'll probably see in applications. But if you weren't familiar with how that worked, we're going to be showing you how all of that does. So the first thing that we want to do is configure our application's I18n support. So we can go into our config application.rb and add some I18n configs in here. First one is available locales. This is going to be an array of languages. So if we wanted Spanish and German, we could say EN, ES, and DE. That's going to be English, Spanish, and German. That's the language codes that we have here, and we can then say config.i18n.default locale equals en, so our default language will be English. And if we want to say i18n.fallbacks equals true, this is going to check other languages like our default locale for a translation. If for some reason we didn't have a translation in German and we were trying to render one, it would go and fall back to English and at least return something rather than leaving it empty or throwing an error. So the fallbacks option, I think, is probably a good default to use because it's going to help you, well, not necessarily in development, you might want to turn that off, but in production, you'll probably want to make sure that you are still rendering something even if you missed a key somewhere. Now, the config locales folder is where you're going to want to define your locales. In this example, I'm using devise, so we have a special devise.en.yaml, and you can add other languages for that. But there is a devise I18n gem that you can use that will include all of the translated views and the translation strings. Now, devise views don't actually have all the translations built in, so you'll want to use that gem for the better templates and the full translation support, and it's already pre-translated into other languages for you. So this is an example here of a translation file. They show you in your views how you can use the T helper, but you can always call i18n.t from anywhere in your code base to translate a string. The string that you give it will be the key name here, and you don't need to include the en at the beginning because that will be automatically included with the locale that is set. So that is something that we can dive into, but you will want to add, for your other languages, we'll want to add a node in here for es.yml, and we'll want to add one for de.yml. So that will give us files for all of our languages. And we'd go through and put all of those locales underneath the language keys. So that's the code for the language. And we want to put, just like in English, hello world would go into each one of these. And it would just need to be translated into German and into Spanish. So we would have hello and put our translation in there. So let's talk about how to actually set the language in your Rails app. Now the Rails guides are going to tell you to use an around action to set the locale. And this will work fine. So we can simply set the locale in here like so. So if we wanted to force it to Spanish, we could hard code it for development or testing or whatever. And this will work fine except for the case that you might be using anything rack-based that would render a string. And in our case, devise renders our error messages, and this is not going to set the language correctly for it. And we can use a before action instead, and that will solve our problem. Now, the original reason why they said don't use a before action was that a long time ago, i18n.locale equals used to be not thread safe. It is now, and so it's totally safe to do it this way, and is the way you're going to need to support devise. Now, the around action just kind of helps to set your locale around the current request and then undo it as soon as that's done. And you would actually use I18n with locale and yield to the request if you're using the round action. You can check the Rails guides for that. I would use that version if you're not using devise, but if you are, this is the way that you want to go, and this will work fine for all those cases as well. Now, this is hard coding the language, but we want to actually pull that out of several different places. One of those could be the URL. So we might say blog lang equals es. So in that case, we would want to say params lang to pull out the Spanish language code there. Another option is the HTTP accept language header. This header is a little bit complicated in its format, but it makes sense. You can pass in the languages separated by commas, and the browser is going to do this for you. But you can pass in the languages separated by commas and spaces, and then you have the language code with a subtype if you want, and you can have a weight to it as well. So if you prefer French over English, then you can put a weight to it, and so on. So this is up to the browser to send over, and we're going to write a little bit of regex to do a very rudimentary parsing of this and just grab out the first 2-character language code, and that is it. So we're going to look for only lowercase letters A through Z and grab 2 at a time, and they have to be next to each other, 2 characters. So then we will get French, English, and German. So you can parse this out in a more, robust way on your own, but I wanted to show you how you can use that header. So we're going to say locale from header. We'll make a helper method for this, locale from header, request.env, and we're going to fetch this, so HTTP accept language. Otherwise, if that doesn't exist in the env, we're just going to use an empty string, and we're going to scan for the A through Z, 2 characters of that, and then we're going to grab the first result there. So if there wasn't a header passed over, we'll have an empty string, we won't have any matches, and our first result will be nil. So that will allow us to fall back to, say, the I18n.default locale. So some applications you might want the user to be able to specify their language so they can see that by default. So we can also say in here, if user signed in, I18n.locale equals current user.language. And we could fall back otherwise to looking at the request details for that. So this is going to be pretty simple. We can run Rails generate migration, add language to users, language, Rails DB migrate, and then we would just want to have the language as an option you can set. So in this example here, if I permit that in the devise parameters, we could add the language field as a select box to registration or to edit their registration to set their language. And we could set it by default to English or whatever we wanted, and that would work great. So these are several different options you can use. There's a lot of other options too. Sometimes people use subdomains. Sometimes people use like the end of the domain. So like .co.uk, you might want British English, and you can use the domain itself to actually set the language if you want it. There's a ton of different options. Check out the Rails guides for some of those if you are interested. Now let's dive into actually rendering out the translations. So if we go into our home index.html.arb, right now we have some messages from Jumpstart that aren't translated. So we can go through here and simply extract those. So we will say T, and we'll say welcome, and render that out as ERB. And if we run our Rails server, what we're going to get by default is this welcome. And that's actually because we don't have a key in our language files called welcome. So it's actually capitalizing that welcome and rendering it out directly. So if we said welcome Chris here, we can render that, and it's going to capitalize every word and render that out. So that's one of the fallbacks that it's using. But in our case, we want to actually set that translation. So what we can do here is we can set the translation key. So we'll say welcome, and we'll say welcome with an exclamation mark, and that will render this out. If we wanted to pass in parameters here, so we can have welcome and we can say name is Chris. We can go in here and say welcome name. And by using the % curly brace syntax, that gives us a variable we can interpolate into there, and we just give that key in the hash of options when we call the translate method. So we get welcome Chris. So this is really, really handy, but one of the cool things that we can do too is we can add a period at the beginning of our key. So when we render this, we're going to get welcome again because it can't find the translation for us. And the reason for that is if you use a prefixed period at the beginning of your key name, this is actually going to be smart enough to look at your view name. So we are in the home controller and the index action. So this is actually going to look in here for home, index, welcome. So this is a really, really nice way of scoping your translation keys without having to write home.index.welcome. You can just simply specify .welcome and it will know to go and prefix the controller and view name onto that for you. So this is really, really handy and a great way to organize your code without having to add a whole lot of extra manual labor into writing your views. One of the reasons you might want to put things at the top level, like welcome here, is that you can reuse this key in multiple places. If you were to put a welcome message on 2 pages, and you use the period at the beginning, you'd actually have to end up with 2 different keys in your locales file. So that's something important to note if you're going to use that with the period here. So if we go into, say, German, and we paste in this, and we say, let's go to translate.google.com, and we just do a quick welcome, translate to German. We can grab this and just paste that in. And so now we can go to our application and we can add the lang equals DE, and we'll see that it automatically translated that string for us when we visit that URL. Now we can also remove this, go back to our English version and use a browser plugin like Locale Helper, and this allows us to set that as our HTTP accept language header. So if we go into our network request here and we refresh the page for localhost request, we want to look for the request headers, and you'll see here that we have an accept language of DE. Now we have a very simple version of that where it's just the language, no preferences, no weightings or anything, but that does work just fine. So that's a good example of how to test your translations. You can also set that on the user as well. But I want to point out here too that you can use this translation anywhere in your application. If we were to go into our home controller's index action and we say flash notice equals t.welcome, we can do the exact same thing as we did before. And remember, we have home index welcome as the only key there. We'll get that same translated version in our flash notice. And this is smart enough to know that we're also in the home controller on the index action. So it is going to prefix the key with the period at the beginning with the home and index as well. So this is the exact same version as saying home.index.welcome. If we refresh our page, we'll see that same flash message there. If we were to leave this out, it's going to tell us that there was a translation missing for de.welcome, and that's when we might realize, oh, our home index is missing from that key name. We forgot the period. So we can refresh and see that it translates correctly now. So we've talked about using translation keys with arguments, but if we went to our home index.html ERB, we can change this to say welcome HTML, And if we go into our English, or it really doesn't matter, it could be our German or English, doesn't matter at all. If we say strong in here, by adding the HTML at the end of the key name, Rails is automatically going to mark it as HTML safe, which is super duper cool. So now if we were to go back to looking at this in English, we are going to see we got home index welcome, translation missing, because we need to save that home index html.erb welcome HTML here. And if we refresh, or actually that one's from the flash message, so home controller, let's get rid of this flash notice or commented out. But you'll notice here that we have welcome and Chris is in bold. So that is really awesome because it allows us to add a little emphasis, like if you need a span tag or a strong tag in your translation, and it would make it easier, you can have that interpolated into your translations. So rather than ending up with multiple translations, if you need to bold a word in the middle or something, you wouldn't want to break that into several different translations. You can just have it as one string with the underscore HTML automatically marking it as HTML safe. Now you'll probably want to make sure you sanitize this, so be careful about that, and make sure you sanitize the arguments you're passing in. But this is very, very handy anytime you need to use something like this. You can insert links or anything else that you might want. So we could say link to Chris, and we can just link to nowhere for now. But this is going to make that a link. So that is super duper cool to be able to add the HTML underscore at the end of your key name. Now there are a handful of other options that you can use in your translations file to set things like placeholders and label tags and other things like that for active record models. We can talk about those in a future episode if you're interested. Let me know in the comments below. And we'll definitely be talking about translating your models. So if you have a blog post, you have one in English and one in Spanish as a translation of the same thing, we will talk about how to render your models out and organize them in different languages correctly. So that's what we'll talk about in a future episode. But until then, let me know in the comments below if there's anything more you would like to see, and I will talk to you guys in the next episode. Peace.